Hi everyone, welcome to Spill the Beans. My name's Duncan Goldie. I hope you're all doing well. My guest this week is Alex, the founder of Sutrue, which is a medical device manufacturing product. He's, quite a character, as I'm sure you'll find out very, very quickly. But it's just his positive attitude towards, this industry really helps him to kind of stand out, and it's obviously reflective of the success that he's having, and he's been working on these medical devices for such a long time, and it's just really inspiring to see his attitude towards his work and his passion for it, particularly for someone who didn't have any medical experience prior to founding Sutrue. So yeah, it's really incredible just to listen to him speak. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Take it away. Great. Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me on the podcast today. Tell me firstly, whereabouts in the world are you? We generally have people from all over.
We're in London. I'm currently in Woolwich. I work mostly from home, but we also work sometimes with our helpful hospital at the Royal Brompton, and we have a London office as well.
Fantastic. And how's the working from home situation been for you? You're obviously quite used to it, or?
Yes, because most of the work that we do is CAD work, or most of the work I do is CAD work. It can be pretty much anywhere, and sometimes you need the quiet to concentrate. So
yeah. Well, it's nice to be able to get that at home.
The lockdown really hasn't made any difference to me.
Perfect. Well, that's an ideal situation, I guess. You're ahead of the game.
Yeah, and funny enough, medicine is not funny at all, actually, but medicine is one of the games that hasn't taken so much of a hit, and medical R&D just plods along whatever else is going on in the world.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's even exacerbated slightly as well.
Yeah.
So perfect. So, I mean, you founded a business called Sutrue, but tell me what kind of led you up to get to that point. If you can just talk me through the kind of your career and professional life.
So I originally studied architectural design, so I knew how to draw, and I spent my early youth in quite a few different jobs, traveling the world. I've worked in France, the Cayman Islands, the US, a whole range of different jobs. And I was back in the UK and had happened to have broken my ankle. So I was laid up for a little while, and I saw a documentary by Robert Winston, called Super Doctors, I think the documentary was, and it was on how stitches were done robotically, and somehow decided at the time that they were demonstrating doing stitches with forceps, and I decided with no prior knowledge that I was going to find a better solution, and had some time because I was laid up at home, and started doing some initial designs which were awful when you look back at them now, and spoke to my GP, who introduced me to a surgeon who encouraged me, but it took 6 years to actually come up with the solution that made it work, by which time I'd sold my house, my car. I lived in a tent for 6 months.
Wow.
Getting finance was or getting any kind of backing when you don't have the solution was very difficult. So I just sort of had to plod along. It was about, I think, to find the solution was about 8,000 design hours.
Wow.
But it did finally succeed, and it worked in a way, because there are a couple of other suturing devices that have gone onto the market and not been taken up very well. And luckily enough, I hadn't seen those beforehand, because I think if I'd seen them, I might have had a predisposed idea as to which direction to take. That's how it started.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what a story. So obviously it doesn't look like you're in a tent anymore. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not sure. But in terms of the actual business then, so I mean, Sutrue's been going for a while now. Has it been about sort of 11 years or so? What's tell us about the, you know, how things have gone over that time.
So as I say, the first 6 years was trying to get the thing to work. We then got some funding from the NHS and from some private investors. We started the company officially in 2013, having put in a patent application as well, once we determined what the mechanism was, the fundamental mechanism. There, you know, there have been changes since. And then since 2013, we'd originally started with handheld versions of the device for external stitches. Part of that was with regards to safety. So there is legislation that says that for needles, if there is a safety device available, that hospitals should use it. And it's here in Europe and in the US. And so for hypodermic needles, there's 180 odd versions of safety hypodermic needle mechanisms, but nothing for suturing. And needle stick injuries cost billions per year. So we were determined that obviously this is the only safety device for suturing, and it would be taken up. And it really didn't get any interest. The interest became more and more clear as we were reducing the size of the device, until eventually we did a robotic endoscopic version. And that's when really sort of ears started to perk up. So we had to, it's one of the things when you have gone through an inventive process, is you're very stuck on what your idea is that people should be looking at. And you have to be able to flex enough to say, that thing that I worked the most on and which took the most effort is not what people want. It's the newer version that at the time felt like a throwaway. That's the one that we had to concentrate on the most.
Yeah, that's how interesting. So I mean, that must have been quite frustrating for you, from, like you say, the design hours that goes into building these products. Do you think that's replicated in the value that these products add as well, or do you find that, you know, there's still a full suite of products that you've got out there that are underutilized?
Well, you make presumptions. Anybody makes presumptions. If you're not in the market, it's like when you're pitching, for example, to investors or to medics or to anybody else, you make your own presumptions as to how much the market will take this, and you know, everybody in the world is going to be doing stitches with an automated device, and you push that because you are pushing something new. So you're attempting to get people to change their own minds. But when eventually you realize that every end of the conversation was your endoscopic robotic device, at some point you just have to recognize that there's a greater interest in the other side of things. It happens to help that at the moment there are a lot of new robots coming out onto the market, and so in effect, in simple terms, if you are building a new robot, you want to be able to say that yours does something that the incumbent or your competitors doesn't do. So it seems to be that that's the angle that we're now moving towards.
Yeah, fantastic. So how much of I suppose from, you know, if you're an architectural designer and you've got CAD experience and everything like that, I mean, how much was taking on robotics and adding that to your suite of skills? Was that something that you adapted to pretty quickly, or was that easily transferable from the suturing product initially?
So I don't know anything about robotics. The point is that what I've had to learn the most about is about gears, in effect. The way that our mechanism works is that it allows gears to tilt slightly, for want of a better word. Gear engineering 101 is that gears are set in a set distance apart, and that's how they work, and don't change it. We realize that if they move ever so slightly, you know, a tiny fraction, then that would lend to the mechanism that that causes the mechanical force to drive our needle. So that was 6 or 7 years with a university, learning the nuances of gears and learning how to design them. All of our prototypes were 3D printed, so it was learning all the different materials and types of 3D printing through plastics and metals. What happens with medical 3D printing is it tends to be one material for a particular application. So what we were doing was combining multiple materials with non-3D printed components, so laser cuts or chemically etched parts, and nuts and bolts. So, you can 3D print nuts and bolts, but you don't need to, you might as well just buy them. So we were combining all of these different methods of manufacturing for prototypes. And that was probably what took the longest time to learn and to refine.
Yeah. And was it, something that you had intended to do initially, straight from the outset, 3D printing is the way to go? I mean, there must have been sort of some quite big advances within that field in the past few years, or has it stayed the same?
So the very first prototype that we did was with a precision engineering company. It didn't work. It wasn't going to work because it was a before prototype, before we found the mechanism that led this to work. And it cost us, it was something like £1,500, and it took 6 months. In 3D printing terms, you could make the same thing to prove that it doesn't work for £20 in a day.
Right.
So there was, it was big sea change. We worked out once, a few years ago, we worked out that we'd spent something like £140,000 on prototyping, and traditional manufacturing would have been 6.5 million.
Wow.
And it's a time frame as well. At one point I was working on a 3D printer called a Formlabs, which is a desktop printer, and I could design something. I'd then print it to scale, so I print it 4 times larger, but I'd print 4 or 5 versions. So you'd sort of loosely design something. You wouldn't have to be absolutely specific and spend 100 hours on it. You'd spend 4 or 5 hours, do 4 or 5 versions, print them, see which one was going in the right direction, and then refine it again and refine it again. And so the development process was sped up massively by doing it that way, and the cost was minimal.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously the cost savings and everything like that speak for themselves when you're talking about those numbers. So in terms of the actual full suite of products that Sutrue has now, how many products do you have that are sort of being utilized commercially?
So we're not commercial yet.
Okay.
We're still in the development phase. As I said, we do have handheld versions of this that we still think have application. External stitches. One of the professors of medicine that we've spoken to points out that for very large operations and complex operations, you have the surgeon, the superstar comes along and does the important stuff, and then it can be the most junior person in the room that closes up the patient, and that can be quite a large scar. And sometimes that can cause complications to the patient where the internal work that's been done is fine, but it's actually the closing of the patient causes them subsequent problems. So we believe that our handheld device has got application for those types of sutures. It is a safety device, so we think that in certain situations where you have more fear of getting needle stick injuries, it would certainly be a substitute. And then we also have a sort of a miniature handheld device for what's known as, it's minimally invasive surgery, but minimally invasive surgery tends to be thought of as endoscopic or robotic surgery. But another way of looking at this is where if externally you'd normally make a big hole in somebody, you have the smallest hole possible to still do the operation from outside, but then it's very fiddly. So we have a version of our device that has a long arm on it, so you'd be able to reach inside from outside and do any stitching that you'd need to do. And then we have our endoscopic version, which we've proven at 12 millimeters. So 12 millimeters is the tube, the trocar that it needs to travel down. So we've proven that for endoscopy, which is the surgeon controlling the device by hand. And then we've put that on a robot as well. And our next development is the same thing, but at 8 millimeters, which is sort of the standard robotic and endoscopic instrument size. So we're still going through the research process at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds extensive. Have you had much feedback from, you know, clinicians and surgeons that who have trialed the product? Or
we're very lucky. We have a surgeon that we work with, who we've worked with now for 9 years, who is a heart surgeon. He's a robotic surgeon. He was part of the first development of surgical robots. He's an endoscopic surgeon, so he's a go-to everything shop. And he's done a lot of the testing with us, and he's done a lot of suggestions of user application. So the feedback for him, sort of officially from him, is for the robotic and endoscopic, because he tested our devices on a robot. We've also done some testing at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Medical Device and Test Evaluation Centre with several surgeons for our external handheld device. So the feedback's been very good. There is an unmet need, but the difference is you're fighting against the norm. So for external stitches, a surgeon can easily say, I've been doing this for 30 years by hand, which is true. What we learnt a couple of years ago is there's a belief that new medical students who have only played with two-dimensional screens are losing the ability to do things three-dimensionally. They haven't played with Lego and clay. And so there is a professor of medicine who has boldly stated that new medical students are quite rubbish at learning how to stitch. So it may be that this is the time to give them something where they don't have to learn the intricacies of hand stitching. But for the moment, we are concentrating on the endoscopic and robotic devices, which of course are the smallest ones. So they're the most intricate and engineering-wise the most difficult, but there's a great call for that. And it may be that somebody having used the endoscopic and robotic device, they then revert back to seeing the handheld device, and sort of the lesson goes round in a loop.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems like there's, you know, the whole industry is adapting to innovation and a bit of a changing of the guard in terms of the way things were done, versus not necessarily trying to re-educate people, but free up, you know, clinicians' time and allow them to utilize the technology, which seems like it's almost exactly what you're doing.
Part of that's what's called skill deferment. So is it possible for what a senior doctor or surgeon does for it to go down a level of seniority by using a mechanical device? But that's a question of trials and clinical trials and evidence, which, you know, hopefully we will reach. We just need to finish the R&D side of things, which takes time.
Yeah, particularly within this industry, it's not easy to be disruptive, I suppose. So in terms of the sort of, you know, the future and the kind of, you know, growth plans that you've got and you've identified, what's the kind of, you know, short to medium term, long term strategy for Sutrue?
So the next stage is developing the 8mm device. So the 8mm device is an endoscopic and robotic device, but to be honest, they're one in the same. It's just the user interface. So for the endoscopic device, you have a handle that a surgeon holds. For a robotic device, you have an interface to the robot. But the working end, the important end for both of those is exactly the same. It's a device that it does stitches, but it also needs to be able to articulate and rotate. And it's the same for either version of the robotic or endoscopic device. So we're working on that now. The handheld device we are refining. We will be going to do more trials on this. We have to make a decision when the next stage after development is regulation. For regulation, you have to design to manufacture. So you've got to step away from prototyping and look at this as the end product. And that's part of the regulatory process. So there are classifications for medical devices as well. So we will need to pick which device we are going to regulate first, and go through that process, which is it's a hardy process. You have the option as to whether you're doing it, say, in Europe or in the US first. So the US has got 90% of all the robots in the world. So if you were to be introducing a robotic device, maybe you regulate in the US first. But right now, at the moment, we're concentrating on the physical development of those devices, demonstrate those, trial them, make sure that they function, make sure people are interested in them, and then decisions after that.
Yeah, well, it sounds like, it's a hugely complex manufacturing process, but it sounds like, if anyone can do it, you've got a pretty good footprint and experience in the right areas, really.
Part of the manufacturing process is what lends into the design is to minimize the number of different components you have. So as an example, we use gears. We have a gear train. All of the gears in our handheld device are the same size, they're the same gear. We have rollers. We have outer rollers and inner rollers, and they're all the same. All the outer rollers are, and all the inner rollers are. So when you can minimize the different types of components you have, you minimize the cost of manufacturing in the long run. And that's always an ongoing development. The endoscopic and robotic devices are different because they're smaller components, but there's always a way to make it if you're making enough of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the research phase is obviously the most critical, but once it's kind of nailed in, it seems like you'd be able to manufacture, and through the obviously use of technology and 3D printing, you're utilizing all the right areas, really.
Well, there's a funny thing with 3D printing. There's a known curve in the 3D printing world, which is at what point the cost effectiveness of printing falls below the cost effectiveness of mass manufacturing. If you're making 5 of something, 3D printing is nearly always more cost effective. If you're making 1 million of something, molding, for example, is nearly always more cost effective, because printing takes time. So if you're molding 1,000 widgets where you can make 100 per 10 seconds, the 3D printer's just turned on. And it's not going to make 100 in 10 seconds. It's going to make the equivalent of 100th of one in 10 seconds. So at some point, the curve lends you to mass manufacturing, and for regulation as well. Unless you are stating that forever and a day that component's going to be 3D printed, you have to start the manufacturing process that you're going to use for the end product.
Wow.
So, and that costs money. When you start that regulatory process and you're saying this is the final device, that final device has had to be manufactured in most cases, in the way that it's going to be finally manufactured. So then that's tooling costs, and your design better be right. And in that case, we would engage a company to do design to manufacture, which is different to design to prototype.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of work left to do.
A little bit. Sounds like you're nearly there, though.
Yeah. Compared to the beginning when we didn't know how to make it work, sure.
Exactly. Well, you're no longer in a tent, so that's a plus.
Medical devices don't take a year to make. When part of medical devices, it's the class of the device. And when you're talking about doing stitches internally on a robot, this is not a 1-year project. So
there you go. Well, look, I mean, it seems like there's obviously, so much more that people could look into and sort of see, monitor your progress as things go on. What's the best way for them to kind of, keep track and potentially get in touch?
So our website's always a good start. We update our website as we're going along. We have more video of our handheld device than we do of our robotic or endoscopic device. So at the moment, our website is more heavily leaning towards the handheld device, but it's going to change, particularly over the next 3 or 4 months. So we'll be updating that as we do trials. If anyone's ever interested in contacting us on our website, we have emails and telephone numbers. I'm always happy to speak to anybody about this. And yeah, as we progress, we will send out news.
Fantastic. Well, look, I mean, it's obviously really important work that you're doing, and it's definitely not easy. So yeah, it's really interesting, and I think that's that entrepreneurial spirit that you've got that's kind of keeping you going. I'm not sure too many other people could see it through quite the same way you have and still be smiling. So kudos to you. You're doing well.
It's yes, you have to. There's a what's the word I'm looking for? You have to stay positive. Because you have many negative moments. Developing something like this where it now looks simple, but you have to go through the complex to get to the simple. And you have moments of days, hours, days, weeks, and months where you think everything's stopped and you can't develop anything further. And it's perseverance. And I'm not trying to paint a rainbow that stay positive will make something work, but you can't be negative about it.
Yeah.
And help. Sorry, this is the one important thing, especially in the UK, and I think people don't realize and should certainly do more. Call someone. Call a university. If it's a medical device, call a hospital. You will be amazed how walking into a hospital and asking for help, you'll get the help. Walking into a university, or at the moment we're trying to find somebody that can help us with a coating for a particular mechanism. You call a coating company that can't do it, but they'll spend 10 minutes trying to find somebody that can for you. So Google is a wonderful thing, but talking to somebody and just being genuine about what you're trying to do opens so many more doors than I think people think. Without the university that helped me with the engineering, without this wonderful surgeon that's helped us for 9 years, we wouldn't have a device. And they haven't done it for money. They've done it for the intellectual challenge. So if you are doing something where you're at a standstill, you don't have the knowledge engineering wise or whatever it might be, call someone. You'd be amazed.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a great point to finish on. I think it's a huge message for anyone out there that's potentially at the beginning of their journey as well, is that kind of, blend of positivity and also sort of community feel to it as well. I think, brings everyone together, and yeah, there's huge reasons why we're doing this. So, in this industry. So it's fantastic that you're one of the pioneers and on the front lines. So hopefully a very good success story soon as well. So yeah, it's fantastic. But look, I'll let you get on with the important work that you're doing. Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'm sure there'll be lots of conversations off the back of it. Yeah, I look forward to seeing things progress.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Nice talking to you. And
speak soon. Cheers.
Cheers.
So that's that then. Thanks very much to Alex for taking the time to talk us through Sutrue and the products that they've got in development. It's really interesting to get an insight into just quite how much work goes into creating a new medical device product. So obviously, the regulatory, the necessary regulatory process is obviously quite slow, but it's amazing his positive attitude towards the whole process the whole way through. So quite a character, and I think I really enjoyed speaking to him, and I hope you guys did too. So yeah, for now, keep safe, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.